have Dr. Judy Ho with us, who's going to talk about, I think she is a clinical and forensic neuropsychologist, author of The New Rules of Attachment and Stop Self-Sabotage. So welcome, Dr. Ho. And I know you are talking about rethinking about teams, unlocking the power of strong team relationships and interconnectedness for work success and thriving. So we do appreciate your time here today, and I will let you take it over from here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really, really glad to be here. And we are going to be talking about how we can enhance and strengthen team relationships. So many people are still working virtually to some degree. For some people, their jobs are completely virtual, and it can be really hard to have connection, to have good communication. And more and more people are reporting feelings of loneliness. So even if you feel like you're working with people all day, perhaps that communication and that connection isn't really as strong as you would like. And strong team relationships are crucial for several important reasons. One is enhanced communication. So strong relationships foster open and honest communication among all of your team members, whether you are a director, a leader, or a member of the team. When you have team members that trust and respect each other, they're going to feel much more comfortable sharing ideas and concerns and their feedback, and that leads to more effective collaboration and problem solving. Strong team relationships are also important because they foster increased trust and cooperation. Oftentimes, how we move towards a project, how much we're committed to a team and the company's objectives and values is all built on this idea of trust and camaraderie. So if you can really increase that among your team, that's going to be more likely to obtain good results from all the work that you're doing. They can support one another and work towards common goals and really feel like they're all in it together. That idea of a positive team culture that is going to enhance the overall team performance. Strong team relationships are also super helpful for improving morale and engagement. So these positive relationships contribute to a supportive and inclusive work environment where team members feel valued, respected, and appreciated. And in turn, this boosts morale and it boosts job satisfaction. It leads to less turnover at the job, as well as higher levels of engagement and motivation every day. When we have strong team relationships, we also have better conflict resolution. So in teams with strong relationships, conflicts are much more likely to be addressed effectively and constructively. Team members can go through a conflict together and still emerge on the other side, liking one another and being able to work together and being able to talk to each other using skills like active listening so that when there are differences of opinion, that can be resolved well. That is dependent on a basis of strong team relationships in the first place. When we have strong team relationships, people are also more free to increase their innovation and creativity and to be able to use that part of your mind. Our minds cannot be creative if we're feeling like we're in fight or flight, like we have to defend ourselves. So we have to be in a more rest and relaxation state for creativity to flow. So when team members feel comfortable expressing themselves and sharing ideas without fear of judgment or being put down by team members, then that's when creativity is going to flourish. And the strong relationship is going to encourage brainstorming, experimentation, and risk-taking. And of course, that then leads to more novel solutions and approaches that will solve the problems ahead of you. People who are in strong team relationships also have greater resilience to challenges. So when there are challenges within the team or within the company or during a project, they're much more willing to weather the challenges together as a team and to deal with these obstacles and setbacks and to problem solve together as a group rather than avoiding the problem, being more avoidant in a lot of different ways, not only in the project itself, but also avoiding contact during conflict. So that's also going to be super helpful. And as I alluded to earlier, these strong relationships are also going to enhance job satisfaction and retention. Relationships contribute to a sense of deep belonging within the group. And if you feel that way, you're going to be much more committed to the process. So if I haven't given you enough reasons for why strong team relationships are crucial to you not only enjoying your work, but also being able to give your best every day at work without as much burnout and reducing that risk of burnout, then hopefully this has been at least a preview to the kinds of things that you could be experiencing if you were to be able to foster stronger team relationships and being able to work together with others in a way that will help to foster that cooperation as well as that creativity. But of course, sometimes there are these hidden things that we don't realize when we are working with others. And one thing that people don't recognize sometimes and how it really plays a role in your team relationship is how your attachment styles might affect the way that you work. So attachment styles, for those of you guys who have not heard about attachment style, is based on attachment theory. This is work that goes back to the 50s and the 60s by doctors John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth. Attachment bonds begin as soon as a baby is born. And when there are babies who come into the world, we're all helpless as mammalian babies. We're not able to actually do a lot of things by ourselves. And that's by design, right? We're supposed to have caregivers help us with that. But these early relationships tell us a lot about what we believe about ourselves, what happens when we communicate a need, whether people around us are actually going to support us. And also, it actually goes into the development of your self concept, what you believe about yourself and whether you deserve good things in life. So, what happens is when you are a child, when parents and caregivers around you are attuned to your needs and try to meet your needs the best way possible, the child is able to form a secure bond. People with secure bonds as they grow older, they're much more likely to be confident, to be independent while also feeling comfortable relying on others, and to be able to problem solve in ways that make them feel free and to be able to do their best. If you develop one of the insecure attachment styles, and that actually affects up to 75 to 80% of people, then you are much more likely to second guess yourself, to have a more insecure self concept, to have fluctuating self esteem, to have challenges working with other people in different ways. And I will go over each of the insecure attachment styles and how they show up at work. And so the reason why this is also important is because what we learn in our childhood essentially then gets templated into our adulthood, into all of the different areas of our life. Attachment style has been most discussed as it applies to romantic relationships, but that is a very limited view of how attachment theory affects all of us. In fact, I see attachment theory affecting people much more so than even romantic relationships at their work when they set goals for themselves and in their friendships and collegial relationships. And so insecure attachment, as I mentioned, has three main types. This affects about 75 to 80% of people. And the three types are anxious, avoidant, and disorganized. So let me tell you a little bit about how each of these styles might present in a daily environment. The anxious type tends to worry extensively about relationships. So they tend to prioritize relationships and potentially other people's perceptions of them more so than sometimes their own ideas. And they may not feel so secure in their own ideas unless they get validation from the environment. So people with this attachment style, they do tend to be a little bit more insecure about their abilities and their skills. They tend to have lower self-esteem for achievement, and they have higher and stronger need to rely on others for support and to essentially at times even be more codependent in the way that they relate to others. Sometimes they can act in more clingy and needy ways. They may analyze and overthink the meaning behind what other people say and do. And they're usually quite worried about how they are perceived in the work environment. So we'll talk a little bit afterwards about how this shows up at work and what you can do about it if you yourself feels like you have one of these insecure attachment types or people in your team has one of these insecure attachment types. And as I mentioned, more than 3/4 of people have said they have insecure attachment style of some sort. And those are only the people who are being honest. So I think that it might be even higher. So chances are, whether you ascribe to one of these styles or somebody that you work with does, it's going to affect you one way or the other. The second insecure attachment style is the avoidant type. So these individuals are fiercely independent. They seem really confident and self-sufficient most times, at least at probably a peer. Although I think deeply avoidantly attached people, they want to have connection with others. They want to rely on others, but because of their early childhood experiences, they feel like they can't do that. They feel like people disappoint them, so they have to roll up their sleeves and do everything themselves. So in general, they really want to be in control all the time. And as a result, they can be a little bit of distance and aloof in most of their relationships. They're much more unlikely to open up to others and maybe have a hard time actually working in groups. And especially when you ask them to express their private thoughts or emotions, they may feel quite discomforted by that. The last insecure attachment style is the disorganized type. This is kind of a style that I think has been very misunderstood. Sometimes people will say that the disorganized type is a combination of the anxious and avoidant type. But I think if that's the case, then you're a combination of anxious and avoidant. This is something that also people don't recognize about attachment theory is that you don't necessarily just have one category that you belong to. You could have a mix of types. And an anxious avoidant type combination type is a very common one. I think that the defining feature of the disorganized type actually has to do with their feeling of being in fight or flight more often than not. They kind of feel like they always have to watch their back, like whatever they're going through, they might get attacked, berated, rejected in some way, and they're always trying to avoid that. So as a result, it's really hard for them to regulate themselves emotionally to be able to move forward in these higher order tasks. Because if you don't feel physically and emotionally safe, it's really hard for you to achieve and go for some of those higher level goals. And so how this shows up at work is a variety of different ways, but I think that it can just be hard for them to consistently and persistently work towards something, especially if they don't feel safety in their social environment. So how do these attachment styles affect you as an employee, as a leader? Let's go through the anxious attachment first. So according to the research that we have, this anxious attachment style can result in a number of personal and professional struggles in the workplace that stem from this lower self-esteem, these higher levels of insecurity and self-doubt. And so what we find is that people who are anxiously attached at work, they might constantly seek approval from their colleagues, and they may be thinking about that more so than what they're actually working on. They might overly invest in their interpersonal relationships at work. They try really hard to be liked by everyone, and they try to conform to the group's wishes to avoid confrontation, even when maybe that's not in the best interest of the work that they're doing. So this constant need for approval can cause anxious employees to be a bit more clingy and needy, and also at the same time feel more lonely at work. And so they might actually distance themselves more at times when they feel like they're not being supported. And when they don't have help from others, they might have more of a trouble moving forward on an individual task. Also, because they're oftentimes thinking that people don't appreciate them and might undervalue them, that might actually lead to more self-sabotaging tendencies at work as well as they're moving towards something, even though they're doing a great job. If they haven't heard validation, then it's harder for them to continue to move forward. So they do have a little bit more of a hypersensitivity to feedback, and also negative expectations about the leaders and the supervisors that maybe they're going to negatively critique their behaviors. When we talk about the avoidant attachment style, one of the things that comes up is that people with avoidant attachment really are not very social at work. They don't actually seek closeness with their colleagues. They don't rely on social support. They might believe that other people can't do it as well as they can. So they end up doing everything themselves. And obviously that creates a lot of teamwork conflicts. A lot of times they may actually use work as an excuse to not socialize within the group. So almost kind of rejecting any attempts at connection by others. And they might be even a little bit resistant to leadership. So if they're an employee, they might question their leaders a lot. They might want a lot more control when the leaders are trying to also interject and be able to guide the process. And I think that in times when they're working in teams, they really want everything to be super defined and they kind of want to be able to do things their own way as opposed to being able to compromise a little bit easier. When somebody has a disorganized attachment style, how this shows up in the workplace is, as I alluded to earlier, because they're so sensitive to potential fight or flight and potential dangers, it can be hard for them to be consistent in their work product. With relationships, they can also run a bit hot or cold. Sometimes they'll look like they really want to connect. Other times they can be really stressful. And this is because they have difficulty emotionally regulating in any environment. And definitely in the workplace, when there are higher stakes, these types of hypersensitivities will come up even more. So for somebody who has disorganized attachment, it may be so different from day to day that it can be hard for team members and leaders to know exactly how to guide them to get the best result. So now that you know how some of these insecure attachments might show up at work, either in yourself or in people that you're working with and perhaps guiding if you're a supervisor or a leader. It's really important to start talking about some of the takeaways. How can we solve these problems? How can we create more communication and interconnectedness while taking into account everyone's attachment styles? The first tip that I have for you is that it's really important to just be aware of what someone's attachment styles might be. I don't think that it's a good idea for you to guess what somebody's attachment style might be. I think that it would be a much more useful exercise if you actually all take an attachment assessment together. So I have one that's available on my website. It's free. You can check it out at drjudyho.com, and you can download it and share it with your team members. You can do it as essentially a team building activity, and then talk about how your attachment styles might show up both in good and not so great ways. Each of the insecure attachment styles actually carry with it some pros as well. There are benefits to having some of these insecure attachment styles. So instead of thinking about how they can only create problems, that's not true. Each insecure attachment style also has its benefit. And also, people who have insecure attachment style, once they are acknowledging their insecure attachment style and the negative consequences that it's led to, they can heal their attachment style and work towards more secure attachment, so that their work and their relationships can be improved. And so it would just be good to kind of talk about this more of as a team approach, a very no shaming conversation, where you can really understand there are certain preferences for communication of each of the attachment styles. And then talking about, well, what do you need most from me? So for example, with anxious attached person, they might need a little bit more validation to get started. That doesn't mean that they can't be promoted to do things on their own. It does mean, though, that they might need a little bit more guidance and support in the beginning to get started. Somebody with avoidant attachment, they do prefer high levels of independence. While you can obviously honor that, it's also important to encourage them to do certain things in teams. But one way to work with somebody with avoidant attachment is when you know that they're in the middle of a big project, they don't like being interrupted, right? So it's really important that you actually set up ahead of time when you want to speak to them, rather than just kind of go into their office while they're working on something, because that is not going to be met with a positive attitude. They're going to be kind of stressed about it, that they're being interrupted. So they just need a little bit more organization and a little heads up ahead of time if you want to talk to them for something that's more urgent. And so once you realize what people's attachment styles are and how that relates to communication skills, you can develop more of a template of how to communicate with this person and how to do something with this person so that they actually honor and value what you're bringing to the table. Sometimes with people with avoidant attachment, they don't really want a lot of pleasantries. If you're going into a meeting, they kind of just want to get into the agenda and start talking. Somebody who has anxious attachment, they're going to want a little bit of those pleasantries in the beginning. They want to feel like you see them as a personal human being. And so you might want to say something like, well, how was your weekend? How's the family doing, before getting into the agenda? So kind of knowing what communication styles are best for each type also helps you to validate them in the best way possible to bring the best out of them. There's also a number of other things that I think are important to highlight in terms of how we can improve workplace connection and communication. One thing that's super, super important is creating a safe place for workplace communication. No matter what attachment style you have, in order for team meetings to be productive, you have to create a sense of psychological safety. So psychological safety is defined as being able to show and employ one's self without fear of negative consequences of self-image, status, or career. And so you have to create a team environment where people feel comfortable expressing their ideas, voicing criticism, and asking quote unquote stupid questions. And when this happens more often, employees are going to be more willing to say what they really mean instead of just playing along. And that's super important for certain anxious attachment styles and disorganized attachment styles, because these two styles will have a harder time communicating directly. The avoidant attachment person is not going to have a problem with that. But you have to be able to create a place of safety so that everybody can express their needs freely and that they're not going to be judged. And the best way to do this is to lead by example if you're a leader. And so showing that this is how we're going to do it. This is how we're going to take in information. When we're in the middle of a brainstorming session, we're not going to be inviting critiques or feedback or questions. We're just going to let people flow and talk about what they want to talk about. These things are extremely important for creating a safe place for the team. It's also really important, especially when you're working remotely, and even when you're not working remotely, to have regular one-on-ones with people within your team. And if you're a leader, to have regular one-on-ones with employees. It's nice when somebody says that they have an open door policy, but people will find it much easier to communicate what's on their mind if you have a setup meeting weekly or bi-weekly or at least monthly so that they know they have FaceTime with you. And even if they think, well, I don't have much to talk about, once they show up, there's going to be things that they bring up or that you bring up. And so having that in place is going to be very helpful. Again, especially with individuals with certain kinds of insecure attachment styles, they might find it the most comfortable to build a relationship in a one-on-one basis rather than in a group. And so being able to set up what people need in the work environment is so important. And I think that you have to address the individual needs of people by making sure that there are these regular one-on-ones with your employees. I also think that it's really important that when you do have a team meeting, that instead of just saying, well, we're always going to have a 1 hour meeting, it really should fit the agenda. That's going to be super helpful for people, especially those with avoidant and disorganized attachment, because they don't want to just be twiddling their thumbs at a meeting when there's not that much to talk about just because they have to fill the hour. So if you are a leader, really important for you to think about, okay, what's actually on the agenda this week? Do we need a 20-minute meeting, a 40-minute meeting, a 1 hour meeting? And how much of this can I actually communicate in a memo versus in a meeting where we actually need to have live discussion? It's really important to be able to do that because that also shows your team members that you are respecting their time and their contribution. I think it's also really important to provide different modalities for communication. So for some people, listening to something that's helpful for them. For other people, they need to see it in writing. So make sure that you provide different modalities for communicating your expectations and to-dos. Just saying it in a meeting and dictating it is not enough for some people. For certain insecure attachment styles, they're going to have a hard time keeping up in the moment, but later on when they're kind of on their own, it's a lot easier for them to review the to-dos and then be able to clarify from there. So it's really important to provide a multi-modality presentation for anything that is clear expectation or to do that you know that you must be completing. The last thing that I will say too is, to build more connection, one of the most effective tools is to create some kind of team event that rotates among different kinds of activities. Some people are going to like team events where, there's a lot of free open communication. It's kind of just open-ended, like you're just going to have a happy hour for your workplace. And other people are going to appreciate more scheduled events, things that have actually an agenda, maybe where you're learning something together, developing a skill together. So making sure that there's room to do team development events in all these different ways, because everybody is going to take something different away from that. And if you only have one type of team activity or team event, it may only be reaching a person who has a certain preference and may make other people feel isolated and like you don't understand them and that you're not really fostering connection in the way that they want. So I think in conclusion, to wrap up before we talk a little bit about any questions, it's most important to know that everybody has a different communication style. Everybody has a different attachment style that came from some time where you didn't even know that. And so you don't necessarily see these apparently, but you might be able to see it in some of their workplace behavior. So being able to support everybody's unique approach and how they see things as well as how they see themselves is going to be the best way to communicate and to improve workplace connection so that you can get the most out of your employees and out of yourself.
Thank you, Dr. Ho. That was a lot of good information. So I do have a couple of questions. I was kind of curious myself. You did talk about the attachment style assessments, and you said they were available on your website. I think I'm going to do that right after we're done later today. But is that available for public to generally, like anybody who would want to do that, to be able to go do that on the site?
Yeah, definitely. So just go to my website and you'll see the attachment quiz and you're going to be able to do that. Anybody can access that.
Perfect. That's one. The other question I think, and as I heard you talk about all these different aspects, um, there's one aspect I think a lot of us are maybe dealing with in our own ways, which is, you talk about burnout in workplace and, how your value-based living and how that kind of interplays with your workplace, management styles, and then how it all falls on you and how you deal with the burnout coming out of it, right? So what do you think, how do individuals rather, kind of identify those trigger points maybe, or even identify that they actually are burnt out. I mean, a lot of us, I think, we just trip on and trip on and trip on. We think, oh, it's okay. I'll manage it. I'll do this. I'll do that. But then there's always at one point, right? Which is like the tipping point. So I think even to
Yeah.
get to that point, like to avoid getting to that close to that point, what can people do? What do you suggest?
Yeah, great question. I think sometimes people have this misunderstanding that burnout only happens when you don't really like your job or when you don't like what you do or you don't like your coworkers, etc. But actually, the people who are most prone to burnout and especially burning out and not recognizing it are people who are actually very passionate about their work and passionate about their job because that's when you put in those extra hours. That's when you always say yes to everything. Because you're like, no, this is important. And then before you know it, you're burnt out and you didn't recognize the signs. And so actually, if you're thinking about this and you're like, no, but I love my job. People who love their job are actually the most prone to burning. But the three major things to look for, and for everybody, burnout can look differently. So you might say, well, one of these things happened to me, and that's when I know I'm burnt out. For other people, they say, no, I see all three. But essentially, the three things to look for is emotional exhaustion. That's number one. So essentially, no matter how much you're resting, how much you're sleeping, you just feel tired, you just feel exhausted. Even when you take a day off, even when you take a vacation, when you come back, you're still exhausted. So this idea of persistent exhaustion, no matter quality of sleep, no matter self-care, no matter how much time you've taken off, that's one indicator. The second indicator is a aspect of cynicism and distancing. So it's almost like you notice yourself losing a little bit of empathy for other people. You notice that you're just feeling like a little bit distant from your work, like you're not super connected to it. And also you notice that even though you're generally a positive person, that you're just becoming more cynical. Like you'll say things that seem a little pessimistic or like a little caustic when somebody says something like, that is another major indicator for a lot of people. The third component of burnout is not feeling effective at your job. Even if people are saying, you're doing a great job, you're like, I don't really think so. I just feel like something's missing. Like, no matter how much effort you're putting in, and even if you're getting positive feedback from others, just like a vague feeling that you have yourself that something isn't as good as it should be. Like, you should be doing better and you're not. So, those are the three main components of burnout we should be watching for.
Okay, that's good to know. And I know I can now see that I did go through that a while back. But but then I think the other again, I think important aspect is the different types of attachment styles versus with the communication styles at workplace, the management works, workplace work styles, and your own work. If people were looking for resources to help them, any support networks, general resources that they could go um, to kind of navigate through those issues, rather, what would you say? Like, are there like one or two publicly available general resources you would say, hey, this might be a good way to start off if they were looking for more than maybe they do approach a more a medical side of things and how to deal with it. But otherwise, in general, though, where would you think people could go to get some more insight or just support?
Yeah. So, the NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, is a great organization for people who are looking for free resources of all kinds, including free groups that also happen virtually. They actually have some focus on work burnout and how to reduce the potential risks for depression and anxiety that can come with chronic burnout. And so that's a great place to look for information and resources. Another great place is just kind of looking around at like specific organizations in your community. It's really interesting. But for example, Chamber of Commerce within your city, they actually have wellness events, organizations that like come and speak to the public. And we don't actually have to be a member of a chamber of commerce to do that. But for people who are, parts of owning small businesses, especially entrepreneurs, I think that's a great resource because I've seen a lot happening in local chambers of commerces where they're starting to do more wellness workplace events for everybody who is working in that community.
Great. I think that's good to know. And I think again, if people do maybe reach out to family or friends, and some people don't do that either. So I think it's always good to like, okay, there's a group of people who are strangers, but you can still go, reach out to them, chat with them, whatever, like give and take ideas and suggestions. So I think that's going to be pretty helpful. Maybe they're going to be more open about doing that versus any other route, right? So, but
Exactly.
it's great. Absolutely wonderful. We do appreciate your time today. Thank you for coming in, chatting with us. I think a lot of folks will definitely see the benefit. A lot of great insights here. And like I said, I'm going to definitely try out the attachment style assessment on your website at some point today, later today. But thank you and have a great rest of your day. We do appreciate your time today. Thank you, Dr. Ho.
Thank you so much. It was great to be here. Take care. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.